This phone is pretty underrated. There's not been a lot of information out there, and if you're looking to buy a premium Android, I think this might be a great option to consider. But let's talk a little bit more about it. So this phone is by Motorola, and it's the Edge 50 Ultra. And the Ultra is probably because it's the most premium phone you can buy from Motorola right now. Yes, there are the foldable ones, but this is their powerhouse. And let's start by the screen. It actually has a POLED panel, which feels extremely premium, has very nice contrast, has very good blacks, has as well very nice colors. But it also has a refresh rate of 144 Hz, which is insane considering that most phones at this price point or even higher go up to 120 still. The standard for most phones is 120, so 144 Hz, not bad at all. The skin on it, which is the Android Motorola version they have, is pretty fluid, feels very nice, and as well doesn't have a lot of bloatware. But that's been the situation for Motorola for quite a few years, so it's not a surprise it feels pretty good when you're using it or just navigating between menus. But the best part of this panel is not only the colors and the contrasts, it's also the peak brightness. It can go up to 2500 nits, which is great if you're outside or you live in a place where there's a lot of sun, like the beach or maybe the desert. So 2500 nits probably more than enough for most people. Another thing I also like a lot is that it has 12 gigs of RAM. There is a version that has 16 gigs of RAM, but the one we have today only has 12, which is, again, not bad, and there's not going to be that much of a difference between 16 and 12 unless you're a true power user and you edit on this phone and have maybe like 10 or 20 apps open at the same time, which I think is not going to be the situation for most people. And all of this is powered by the best processor you can find for Android phones right now, and that is the Snapdragon 8S 3rd Gen, which is an awesome processor. It has great power. You can run any game at the highest frame rate possible on an Android phone and probably cap out most of the mobile phones at their highest settings. As well, it gives you a killer battery life. This phone only has 4500 milliamps in the battery. I would have liked to see a bigger battery, but I understand why they did it because this processor actually gives you a better battery life independently if the battery is big or not. It also helps out a lot with the fast charge that's included. Inside the box, you can find a charger of 120 watts. Yeah, 120 watts for a 45 milliamp battery means you can charge it below 22 minutes. From 0 to 122 minutes, it's insane. Considering that an iPhone takes between an hour and a half, 20 minutes, not bad, right? So now that we talked about the operating system and you know it's pretty fluid and feels pretty premium when you're using it, like an Android premium phone should, what's the deal with the cameras? What's in the rear? Well, first of all, you have a main sensor of 50 megapixels, which is pretty good. Either in good lighting or dark scenarios, I think it performs very well. Compared to the last generation, it takes very good pictures, but it also does the photo processing a lot better than the previous generation. The last one was okay, but I always thought that the cameras were the weak point in Motorola's, and this one is a lot better than most Motorola's I've even tested. Even the one that had like 200 megapixels, I think that was the Moto Edge 30 Ultra. I might be wrong, it might be the 40, but one of those versions had actually 200 megapixels. So they decided to cut down on that and go 50 megapixels, which not always means more image processing and doesn't mean more resolution. It's been proven in different scenarios. So 50 megapixels is not bad. It's probably a lot easier to manage. I understand why they went with that, and they did a great job focusing on just making pictures better. They got better colors, more natural, not too contrasty, but not too washed out. And I think the resolution and the focus on this lens is excellent, especially if you're somebody that enjoys taking pictures outside. Inside, good performance, but outside, excellent performance. Another good addition to this phone is that it has a periscope lens. And that periscope lens is one of the best ones towards megapixels in the market right now. I know I said megapixels don't mean precisely the best resolution or the better performance, but when you have a periscope, it's a good addition because that way you take a picture and you don't lose that much detail when you're taking a picture with zoom or taking it from a distance. And this periscope is 64 megapixels. Again, it does a great job when you're outdoors or even when you're taking pictures at a distance. So, not a bad addition to this phone. It's also complemented by another ultra wide, which is also 50 megapixels, and this one actually has the same situation as the main lens. Pretty good pictures when you're inside, but excellent pictures when you're outside. So, camera wise, you're probably covered with this phone. Quick note, because I know most people don't use the front camera unless you're somebody that takes pictures for Instagram, you like selfies a lot. Good mention that it has also 50 megapixels and it can actually record in 4K 60. So not bad, but the main sensor in the front camera is not as good as the rear one. So I always recommend, if you're gonna take pictures with this phone, use the rear ones. They're way better than the front one, although the front one does a decent job. But it's still a small sensor. I really don't like selfie front cameras. Now, talking about the video on the rear, that is one of the points that surprised me the most. Motorola has always had issues with recording. Video wasn't that stabilized, it was kind of washed out, pixelated. This phone improved quite a bit, and they did the same thing that they did with the pictures. Well, they cut down on how much resolution you can actually film with this phone. Because yes, there used to be Motorola phones with 8K, which is absurd. Nobody needs 8K on a phone. It doesn't process well, there's nowhere to play it, and it's pretty hard to edit. So instead of that, they just focused on making their 4K 60 better, and it worked. Video is very well stabilized, the resolution on it is excellent, autofocus has improved compared to other generations, and yes, it still doesn't look good on Instagram, but that's not only Motorola, that has to do with most Android phones on the market. If you want the best phone for Instagram stories, Instagram Reels, or TikToks, yes, the iPhone, in my opinion, still is the powerhouse for video users, but this does a pretty good job, especially if you want to film things for YouTube. On YouTube, compression works different compared to Instagram and TikTok, so if you want to film YouTube videos, this might actually be a good option. That's why the videos you're watching right now look pretty decent, right? And it does a great job stabilizing, which is what surprised me the most. Another point I liked a lot on this phone, and not all premium phones have, is the stereo speakers on it. They're pretty good. Motorola's always had good sound, but now they incorporated something called Snapdragon sound, and it does a great job. It actually performs better than other premium phones I've tested on the market. For example, the S24 Ultra doesn't have that great of a sound compared to this, so I like the speakers a lot in case you watch YouTube videos, play games without headphones. Again, a nice addition to have on your phone, and pretty pleasant surprise. A couple of side notes on this phone as well is that you do get a case inside the box. It's pretty basic, it doesn't protect that well, and this phone does feel fragile. The corners are pretty exposed, although the surrounding corners of the phone are metal, they're probably titanium. I couldn't find a lot of information, but they look like what every phone is having nowadays, which is titanium. I don't know what grade it is, but it will protect moderately the phone. I do recommend you put a nice case on it in case you buy it. It's like the only downside I found on the design is that the corners are way too exposed. I can see this just falling on a corner slightly on the side and it will break. Even though it has whatever Gorilla Glass you want to put on it, yes, glass still shatters and phones are still not indestructible. Well, there are some of those Chinese ones that have a plastic screen on them, but that's a different point. So, straight to the point, what type of phone is this? Well, it's a premium Android with the best Snapdragon out in the market right now. It has a mid to high range battery. It could be bigger, but it has a very fast charge. It's pretty well optimized with the processor. It has 12 gigs of RAM. Well, you can buy the version that has 16, but I think that one's a little bit more rare. It's only like in Asia, but I might be mistaken. But 12 gigs of RAM is more than enough. It also has 512 gigs of internal storage, which is more than enough for most people. It has a very nice Android skin, pretty fluid, 144 Hz, very premium screen with this POLED panel, looks great, performs excellent with content. You can play practically any mobile game on it, has fast charging. Oh, by the way, it also has 50 watts of wireless charging. So it's pretty hard not to recommend this phone, especially for the price. Now, the price on this phone, and it's kind of weird, and hear me out. There's a global version, which I actually told you is pretty rare, and there's a reason for that, and that's the price. The price of the global version with 1 terabyte, 16 gigs of RAM, and the Snapdragon is $765. You can't beat that price on the market. I don't know any Android phone which has everything this phone actually offers for that price. But if you want to buy the version I have, which is 12 gigs of RAM, 512 internal storage, and Snapdragon as well, it goes for $900, which is pretty weird. But you can find it on sale consistently. I actually have seen it for about $800. $800 and $850 is more or less the mid price you can find now in 2024. So that's why I think this phone is pretty underrated. I know there are Android phones that might record better. I know there are Android phones which have a better build quality. I know there are Android phones which record better and also have more options when you customize them, or even more RAM or whatever you want to put on them. But none of those phones can offer everything this has for the price. So you're getting what's probably the best bang for the buck on a premium Android. So that's what this is. If you want to get an Android phone with premium specs and probably a powerhouse of all Motorola phones that are out right now, this is your best option. And I think it's a very good option, especially if you can nail that one for $765. I'm actually going to look for them and link them down below in the description in case you want to buy them. But tell me what you guys think. Would you buy a Motorola? I think a lot of people have gone back on Motorola, and I really don't understand why. I think it's a very good option. But what do you guys think? Also, let me know what you also think about this video over here. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, it helps us out quite a bit, and I'll see you in the next one.